If you think your town has secrets, wait until you hear this. Before we dig into what was buried beneath Coldwell, Minnesota, smash that subscribe button, hit the bell, and drop a comment telling me how far you'd go to uncover the truth. Because after this story, you're going to question everything about the place you call home. Let's dive in. It was a Tuesday morning in late September when everything changed in Coldwell. The kind of morning where the fog hangs low over the fields, thick and white, swallowing the dirt roads and farmhouses whole. A town of barely 3,000 people, Coldwell was the kind of place where everyone knew your name, your business, and your secrets. Or at least, they thought they did. Marcy Tillman was walking her golden retriever, Boone, along the edge of the old Havermill property. It had been abandoned for years. The house itself had long since collapsed into rotting beams and shattered glass, overtaken by wild grass and bramble. No one went near it. Not because it was haunted, though the kids liked to say it was. It was just forgotten. One of those places that time swallowed up and the town chose to ignore. But Boone didn't care about history. He was sniffing something near the tree line, his body tense, tail stiff. Marcy called him back once, twice. He didn't budge. She walked over, annoyed, tugging the leash. That's when she saw it. A piece of fabric sticking out from the dirt. Faded blue, maybe denim. She knelt down, brushed away some leaves. Her breath caught. It wasn't just fabric. It was a sleeve. And inside it, bones. Marcy stumbled backward, phone already in her hand, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. Within 20 minutes, the Coldwell Police Department had the area taped off. Within an hour, the state forensics team was on site. By evening, the entire town knew. Someone had been buried on the Havermill property. And whoever it was had been there a long, long time. Detective Rachel Frost arrived the next morning. She was from the state's cold case division, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a reputation for not letting things go. She'd seen her share of bodies, but something about this one felt different. The way the town reacted. Too quiet. Too careful. Like they were all holding their breath, waiting to see what came next. The remains were male, forensics confirmed. Late 20s to mid-30s at the time of death. He'd been in the ground for at least 15 to 20 years, maybe longer. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the skull. This wasn't an accident. This was murder. And someone in Coldwell had kept it quiet for 2 decades. Frost started digging. Not into the ground, but into the town's past. She pulled records, old missing persons reports, anything that might give her a lead. One name kept surfacing. Ethan Cole. 28 years old. Reported missing in May of 2003. Last seen leaving a local bar called the Rusty Nail, arguing with someone in the parking lot. The case went cold within months. No body. No witnesses willing to talk. Just another guy who left town and never came back. At least, that's what people said. But Ethan hadn't left. He'd been 15 feet from the road this whole time, buried under dirt and silence. Frost interviewed everyone she could find who knew him. His old co-workers at the grain mill. His drinking buddies. His ex-girlfriend, Claire Donnelly, who still lived in Coldwell, now married with 2 kids. Claire was nervous during the interview, hands twisting a tissue in her lap. She said she and Ethan had broken up a few weeks before he disappeared. It wasn't messy, she claimed. They just grew apart. When Frost asked if Ethan had enemies, Claire hesitated. Then she mentioned a name. Garrett Moss. Garrett Moss was a local contractor, well-liked, respected. He'd grown up in Coldwell, never left. He owned half the buildings on Main Street and sat on the town council. But back in 2003, he and Ethan had a falling out. Something about money. A business deal that went bad. Claire didn't know the details, but she remembered Ethan saying Garrett had threatened him. She remembered the look in Ethan's eyes when he said it. Fear. Frost paid Garrett a visit. He met her at his office, a modest building next to the hardware store. He was polite, calm, cooperative. Yes, he knew Ethan. Yes, they'd had a disagreement. But it was nothing serious, he said. Just a misunderstanding over some contracted work that Ethan never finished. No hard feelings. When Frost asked where he was the night Ethan disappeared, Garrett didn't flinch. He said he was home with his wife. She could confirm it. Frost thanked him and left. But something didn't sit right. Garrett's answers were too smooth. Too rehearsed. Like he'd been expecting the question for 20 years. She went back to the forensics report. There was something else. Fragments of wood and metal found near the bones. Old tools. A rusted hammer. A few nails. The kind of things you'd find on a construction site. Or in a contractor's truck. Frost ran a background check on Garrett. Clean record. No arrests. But she found something else. In 2004, a year after Ethan disappeared, Garrett bought the Havermill property. He'd planned to develop it, turn it into rental units. But the project never got off the ground. Permits were denied. Funding fell through. He sold it back to the county a few years later and walked away. But for a brief window, Garrett Moss had owned the land where Ethan Cole's body was buried. Frost returned to Claire. This time, she asked harder questions. Did Ethan ever mention Garrett in the days before he disappeared? Did he seem scared? Claire broke down. She admitted she'd lied. Not completely, but enough. She said Ethan had come to her house the night before he vanished. He was panicked, talking fast, saying he'd found something. Something that could ruin Garrett. She didn't know what. He wouldn't tell her. He said it was safer if she didn't know. He kissed her on the forehead and left. That was the last time she saw him. Frost leaned forward. What did he find, Claire? I don't know, Claire whispered. But he said it was in the books. Garrett's books. Frost's mind raced. Financial records. Ethan must have stumbled onto something. Fraud, embezzlement, something bad enough to kill for. She requested a warrant for Garrett's financial records from 2003. It took days. Too many days. And in those days, Garrett Moss vanished. His wife reported him missing on a Thursday morning. His truck was gone. His phone was off. No note. No explanation. The town was in shock. The lead suspect in a 20-year-old murder had just disappeared. Frost organized a search. They checked his properties, his friends' houses, the surrounding counties. Nothing. But then, a tip came in. A gas station attendant 2 towns over said a man matching Garrett's description had filled up late the night before. Paid cash. Looked nervous. Headed north. Frost and her team followed the lead. They tracked him to a remote cabin near the Canadian border. It belonged to Garrett's late father. When they arrived, the cabin was dark. Frost approached with her weapon drawn, heart pounding. She kicked in the door. Garrett was inside. Sitting at a wooden table. In front of him, a pile of old ledgers. Financial records. And a handwritten confession. But when Frost started reading, her blood ran cold. Because Garrett Moss wasn't confessing to murder. He was confessing to covering one up. And the person who killed Ethan Cole wasn't him. It was someone Frost had already spoken to. Someone still in Coldwell. Someone who had been hiding in plain sight for 20 years. Frost's hands trembled as she read the confession. Garrett's handwriting was shaky, the ink smudged in places like he'd been crying while he wrote. The words painted a picture she hadn't seen coming, and with each line, the case she thought she understood began to unravel completely. According to Garrett's statement, he hadn't killed Ethan Cole. But he'd helped bury him. The night of May 14, 2003, Garrett received a frantic phone call at 2 in the morning. The voice on the other end was desperate, broken. It was Thomas Havermill, the former owner of the property where Ethan's body had been found. Thomas had been one of Coldwell's most prominent citizens back then, a real estate developer who'd built half the town. Respected. Untouchable. And according to Garrett's confession, a murderer. Thomas told Garrett there'd been an accident. He needed help. Garrett, who owed Thomas money from a failed investment, didn't ask questions. He drove to the Havermill property and found Thomas standing over Ethan's body in what used to be the old barn. Ethan's skull was caved in. Blood pooled beneath his head. A metal pipe lay a few feet away. Thomas claimed Ethan had broken into the property, that he'd confronted him, that things got physical and he'd acted in self-defense. But Garrett knew better. He'd seen the fear in Thomas's eyes. This wasn't self-defense. This was something darker. Still, Garrett helped. They dug a shallow grave near the tree line, rolled Ethan's body inside, and covered it with dirt and debris. Thomas paid Garrett $50,000 in cash the next day. Hush money. And for 20 years, Garrett kept his mouth shut. But Thomas Havermill had died 7 years ago. Heart attack. Natural causes. He took the truth to his grave, and Garrett thought the secret would stay buried with him. Until Boone dug up Ethan's bones. Frost looked up from the confession, her mind racing. If Thomas was dead, why had Garrett run? She asked him directly. Garrett's answer sent a chill down her spine. Because Thomas didn't act alone that night, Garrett said quietly. There was someone else there. Someone who made sure Ethan never talked. And that person is still alive. Frost leaned in. Who? Garrett's voice cracked. His daughter. Rebecca Havermill. Rebecca Havermill. Frost knew the name. Everyone in Coldwell did. She was a pillar of the community, a schoolteacher at Coldwell Elementary, beloved by parents and students alike. She'd inherited her father's estate when he died, including the land that was later sold to the county. She was quiet, kind, always volunteering at church events and fundraisers. The last person anyone would suspect of murder. But according to Garrett, Rebecca had been at the property that night. She was the one who called her father after she and Ethan had an argument that turned violent. Garrett claimed he saw her standing in the shadows when he arrived, her hands covered in blood. Thomas had taken the fall to protect her. And Rebecca had let him. Frost arrested Garrett on the spot for accessory to murder and obstruction of justice. Then she called her team. They needed to bring Rebecca in immediately. But when they arrived at her house on Maple Street, it was empty. The front door was unlocked. Her car was in the driveway. But Rebecca was gone. Inside, the house was eerily neat. No signs of a struggle. No indication she'd packed. But in the kitchen, Frost found something that made her stomach turn. A photo album, open on the table. The pictures were old, from the early 2000s. Images of Rebecca and Ethan together. Smiling. Holding hands. Kissing. They'd been in a relationship. A secret one. Frost flipped through the pages. The photos told a story. Young love. Happiness. But toward the end, the smiles faded. In one picture, Rebecca's face was bruised. In another, Ethan looked angry, his hand gripping her arm too tightly. The final photo was torn in half. Only Rebecca remained, her eyes hollow. Frost's phone buzzed. It was one of her officers. They'd found Rebecca's co-worker, another teacher named Dana Mills, who agreed to talk. Dana confirmed what the photos suggested. Rebecca and Ethan had dated in secret for almost 2 years. Ethan was charming at first, but he became controlling, jealous, violent. Rebecca tried to leave him multiple times, but he wouldn't let her go. He threatened to tell her father about the relationship, knowing Thomas would disapprove. Ethan had a criminal record, a history of assault. Thomas Havermill would have destroyed him if he knew. But then, in early May of 2003, something changed. Rebecca came to school with bruises on her neck. She told Dana that Ethan had tried to strangle her during an argument. She said she was done, that she was going to end it for good. Dana begged her to go to the police, but Rebecca refused. She said she'd handle it herself. A week later, Ethan disappeared. Frost pieced it together. Rebecca had lured Ethan to the Havermill property under the pretense of reconciliation. But she didn't plan to get back together. She planned to end it. The argument escalated. Ethan became violent. And Rebecca defended herself. Whether it was self-defense or premeditated murder, Frost couldn't yet say. But either way, Thomas covered for his daughter. He took responsibility, made Garrett complicit, and ensured Rebecca's life continued unblemished. But now, with the truth surfacing, Rebecca had run. Frost issued an APB. Rebecca's face was plastered across every news station in the state. Tips started pouring in. Someone spotted her at a gas station near the Iowa border. Another person saw her at a motel in South Dakota. But every lead turned cold. Rebecca was smart. She knew how to disappear. Days passed. The media frenzy intensified. Coldwell became the center of a national story. Reporters flooded the town. Parents pulled their kids from school. The community that had once rallied around Rebecca now turned on her. Vigils were held for Ethan. His family, who'd spent 20 years not knowing what happened, finally had answers. But those answers came with more pain. Frost didn't sleep. She reviewed every piece of evidence, every statement, every photo. She became obsessed. This wasn't just about justice for Ethan anymore. It was about understanding how a town could bury the truth for so long. How people could live side by side with a killer and never know. Then, on the 9th day of the manhunt, Frost received a call. It was from a ranger at a state park 300 miles north of Coldwell. A woman matching Rebecca's description had been spotted near a hiking trail. She was alone, sitting by a lake, staring at the water. Frost and her team mobilized immediately. They arrived at the park just before dusk. The ranger led them down a narrow trail to the lake. And there she was. Rebecca Havermill, sitting on a fallen log, her hands folded in her lap. She looked older than her years, worn down by guilt and time. Frost approached slowly, weapon holstered but ready. Rebecca. Rebecca didn't turn. "I knew you'd find me," she said softly. "I almost didn't run. But I couldn't face them. The people who thought they knew me. You need to come with me," Frost said. Rebecca finally looked up. Her eyes were red, exhausted. "He was going to kill me, you know. That night. Ethan. He said if he couldn't have me, no one would. He brought a knife. I saw it in his jacket." Frost's chest tightened. "Then why didn't you call the police?" Rebecca laughed bitterly. "Because I'd already hit him with the pipe. He was on the ground, bleeding. I panicked. I called my father. And he fixed it. Like he always did." "Where's the knife, Rebecca?" Rebecca reached into her coat pocket. Frost tensed, but Rebecca pulled out a small, rusted folding knife. She handed it over. "I kept it. All these years. As a reminder of what I became." Frost took the knife, bagged it as evidence. "You need to tell me everything. The truth." Rebecca nodded. "I will. But first, you need to know something else. Something Garrett didn't tell you." Frost frowned. "What?" Rebecca's voice dropped to a whisper. "Ethan wasn't the only one my father buried." The forest went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Frost's heart pounded in her chest. "What are you talking about?" Rebecca stood, her legs shaking. "There's another body. On the old Havermill property. Someone who found out what we did. Someone who tried to blackmail my father 2 years after Ethan died." Frost felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "Who?" Rebecca met her eyes, and for the first time, Frost saw the full weight of the horror this woman had been carrying. "His name was Danny Iris. He was Garrett's business partner. And my father made me help him bury that one too." The drive back to Coldwell was silent except for the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the police radio. Rebecca sat in the back seat, staring out the window as the landscape blurred past. Frost gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. 2 bodies. 20 years of lies. And a town that had been built on a foundation of secrets and blood. By the time they arrived, it was past midnight. The Havermill property was lit up like a crime scene from a movie, floods illuminating the overgrown field, forensic tents already being erected. Frost had called ahead. The team was waiting. Rebecca had given them coordinates, measurements from memory. 15 yards west of where Ethan had been found, beneath a cluster of old oak trees. Rebecca stood beside Frost as the ground-penetrating radar confirmed what she'd said. There was something down there. The excavation began immediately. Frost watched Rebecca's face as the shovels broke earth. There was no emotion left. Just a hollow emptiness, like she'd spent every ounce of feeling she had over the past 2 decades. It took less than an hour. The bones emerged from the dirt, along with scraps of clothing, a wallet, and a wristwatch that had stopped at 11:47. Danny Iris, 32 years old when he disappeared in October of 2005. Reported missing by his ex-wife, but the case had gone nowhere. No evidence. No leads. Just another man who walked away from his life in Coldwell and never looked back. Except he hadn't walked away. He'd been silenced. Rebecca told the story in a flat, emotionless voice, recorded on camera in the back of a mobile command unit. Danny had worked with Garrett on several projects in the early 2000s. He'd been at Garrett's house one night, going through old files, when he found discrepancies in the books. Money missing. Payments that didn't add up. He dug deeper and discovered the $50,000 payout Thomas had made to Garrett in May of 2003. Danny was smart. He started asking questions. And eventually, he pieced it together. He confronted Garrett first. Demanded a cut to stay quiet. Garrett panicked and told Thomas. And Thomas, always the problem solver, always the protector of his family's name, decided Danny was a threat that needed to be eliminated. Rebecca said her father called her late one October night. Told her to meet him at the property. She didn't want to go, but Thomas insisted. When she arrived, Danny was already there, bound and gagged in the back of Thomas's truck. He was still alive, eyes wide with terror. Thomas handed Rebecca a gun. He told her this was her mess to fix. That if she didn't do this, everything would come out. Ethan. The cover-up. Her future would be destroyed. Rebecca's voice cracked as she described what happened next. She said she couldn't do it. She refused. So Thomas did it himself. One shot to the back of Danny's head. Then he made Rebecca help him dig. Made her an accomplice again. Bound her to him with blood and guilt. And for 15 more years, she carried that weight. Thomas Havermill had been a monster. But he'd hidden it behind a respectable face, charitable donations, and a position of power. And when he died, the town mourned him. They named a park bench after him. Rebecca had sat on that bench countless times, staring at the plaque with his name, wondering if anyone would ever know the truth. Now they did. Frost processed Rebecca and charged her with accessory to murder in the death of Danny Iris and voluntary manslaughter in the death of Ethan Cole. The district attorney would determine final charges, but Frost knew Rebecca would spend the rest of her life behind bars. Garrett was already facing decades for his role in both cover-ups. The once respected contractor was now reviled, his name synonymous with cowardice and complicity. But the story didn't end there. As forensic teams continued to comb the Havermill property, they found something else. A third set of remains. Older. Much older. Buried deeper, beneath a concrete slab that had been poured sometime in the late 1990s. The bones were fragmented, but dental records eventually identified the victim. Margaret Lorne, a local woman who had disappeared in 1998. She'd been Thomas Havermill's secretary. Frost pulled every record she could find on Margaret. Interviews with her family. Old police reports. The case had been investigated briefly, then dropped. Margaret had been described as unstable, prone to depression. The assumption was she'd run away or taken her own life. But her family never believed it. They'd suspected foul play. They'd suspected Thomas. Margaret's daughter, now in her 40s, came forward. She told Frost that her mother had confided in her weeks before she disappeared. She said Thomas had been making unwanted advances, pressuring her, threatening her job if she didn't comply. Margaret was going to report him. And then she vanished. Thomas Havermill had buried 3 people. Maybe more. And he'd gotten away with it because he had money, power, and a town that didn't want to ask hard questions. The revelations tore Coldwell apart. Town council meetings devolved into shouting matches. People who'd defended Thomas, who'd praised him, now scrambled to distance themselves. The park bench was removed. Donations made in his name were returned. The Havermill legacy, built over generations, crumbled in a matter of weeks. Frost stood at the property one last time before heading back to the city. The excavation was complete. 3 graves. 3 lives stolen. The land looked scarred, violated, but at least the truth was finally exposed. She thought about the dog, Boone, who'd started it all. One curious golden retriever who wouldn't let go of a scent. Sometimes justice came from the most unexpected places. Rebecca was sentenced to 25 years. Garrett got 30. Both would likely die in prison. The families of Ethan, Danny, and Margaret finally had closure, though it came with a bitterness that would never fully fade. But 3 months after the trial, something happened that made Frost's blood run cold. She was in her office, finishing paperwork on another case, when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. But something made her pick up. The voice on the other end was distorted, run through some kind of filter. But the words were clear. Detective Frost. You did good work in Coldwell. But you missed something. Frost sat up straight. Who is this? There's a 4th grave. Thomas didn't work alone. And the person who helped him is still out there. Still in Coldwell. Still watching. The line went dead. Frost tried to trace the call, but it was routed through multiple servers, untraceable. She immediately contacted the Coldwell PD, ordered another sweep of the Havermill property. They found nothing. No additional remains. No new evidence. But the call haunted her. She reviewed every interview, every statement, looking for gaps. Looking for someone she'd missed. And then she found it. A name that appeared in the background of multiple reports but was never questioned. Someone who'd been close to Thomas. Someone who'd had access to the property. Someone who'd stood in the crowd at every press conference, watching, listening. Frost pulled the file. Stared at the photograph. It was someone she'd spoken to. Someone who'd seemed helpful, cooperative, unremarkable. She grabbed her keys and headed for the door. But as she reached for the handle, her phone buzzed. A text from the same unknown number. It was a photo. Recent. Taken just hours ago. It showed the entrance to Frost's apartment building. And in the corner of the frame, partially obscured by shadow, was a figure. Watching. Below the image, a single line of text. Some secrets are better left buried, detective. Ask Margaret's daughter. Frost's hands shook. Margaret's daughter had cooperated fully. She'd seemed devastated, grateful even. But now Frost wondered. Had she missed something? Had the daughter known more than she'd let on? Or was this caller playing games, trying to divert attention? She forwarded the message to her tech team, grabbed her weapon, and headed out. But deep down, she knew the truth. Coldwell's nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. Because in a town that buried its secrets for 20 years, you didn't just uncover one monster. You uncovered a system. A network of people who protected each other, who looked the other way, who chose silence over justice. And somewhere in Coldwell, someone was still keeping watch. Still protecting the final secret. Still willing to kill to keep it hidden. Frost drove through the night, the highway stretching endlessly before her. The lights of Coldwell appeared on the horizon, dim and distant. She thought about Boone, the dog who'd started everything. She thought about Ethan, Danny, and Margaret, whose voices had been silenced for so long. And she made a promise. She wouldn't stop. She wouldn't let this go. Because the dead deserved justice. And the living deserved the truth. Even if it destroyed the town that tried so hard to bury it. The final secret of Coldwell was still out there. And Rachel Frost was coming for it. No matter the cost.